Hello, everyone, and welcome to Silent Kane. I'm Kane, your guide through stories of mystery, danger, and the hidden truths of the underworld. Let's begin today's case. The city was a place of restless shadows, where neon lights promised dreams, but alleys swallowed them whole. By day, the streets bustled with vendors, taxi horns, and hurried footsteps of citizens chasing survival. But by night, another life stirred. Behind velvet curtains of nightclubs, inside smoke-filled bars, and deep in basements where no law dared tread, the underworld ruled. Mafia families dictated the rhythm of blood and profit. Drug cartels tightened their grip on entire districts, and street gangs carved territory with knives and bullets. This was the city Silas Kane walked into, not as a savior, not as a hero, but as a man who carried his own scars. To most, Silas was just another detective. To those who knew his name in whispers, he was something far more dangerous. He had an uncanny ability to infiltrate places no sane officer dared, to read the hidden intentions behind false smiles, and to stand his ground in a world where betrayal was currency. He was the one who stepped where others turned back. But Silas Kane was not without his own ghosts. His past was as fractured as the alleys he wandered. Rumors whispered of a family lost to gang violence, of years unaccounted for in a foreign war, of debts to criminals that could never be repaid. What was true and what was legend? None could say. What mattered was this. Every case he touched revealed something darker beneath the city's surface. Every enemy he faced had a shadow stretching farther than expected. Silas Kane. The city's haunting is not simply the story of one detective solving crimes. It is the story of a descent into webs of conspiracy where loyalties are tested, where lies are crafted as carefully as alibis, and where every truth uncovered costs blood. Each chapter is not only a confrontation with a new crime, but also another layer peeled back from Silas's own life. The city itself becomes a mirror of his haunted past, fractured, violent, but unwilling to surrender. Through tense interrogations, undercover operations in mob dens, and gunfights that erupt without warning, Silas moves like a ghost in a world that wishes him dead. But every step forward threatens to expose his own secrets, the ones he has buried so deep they ache like old wounds. And as the cases unravel, as names are revealed and hidden alliances crumble, Silas discovers that the greatest enemy may not be the criminals in the dark, but the truths that refuse to stay buried. This is not a tale for the faint of heart. Here, justice is not a shining sword, but a bloodied knife. Here, betrayal is inevitable, and loyalty is always a gamble. In the city's haunting, every alley has eyes, every friend may be a foe, and every victory comes at the cost of something dear. Step with Silas Kane into the shadows. Listen closely to the whispers in the alley, the lies in the smoke, the silence after the gunfire. For in this city, survival is not about strength, but about how far you're willing to go when the truth itself is deadly. Rain had a way of washing the city clean and dirty all at once. The downpour that night was no different. It rolled down neon signs until the letters bled together in streaks of blue and red, gathered in shallow puddles that mirrored broken street lamps, and turned the alleys into narrow rivers of murk. The city never truly slept, not even under the heavy curtain of rain. Somewhere, music leaked from a bar, muffled saxophone notes twisting through cigarette smoke. Somewhere else, an argument rose and fell, punctuated by the sound of a bottle breaking against the pavement. Silas Kane moved through this storm like a shadow that had learned to walk upright. His coat, long, heavy, dark, was soaked, but he didn't seem to notice. The brim of his hat was pulled low, shielding his eyes not from the rain, but from the city's gaze. He preferred it that way. People remembered too much when they looked into his face. And in his line of work, being remembered was a liability. The case hadn't officially begun. No file sat on his desk, no officer had handed him evidence, and no grieving family had knocked on his office door begging for answers. It had started with a whisper, the kind carried through smoky bars and crooked card tables, passed from a desperate drunk to a debt-ridden informant. until it reached him. "There's something moving in South District," the whisper had said. "Something bigger than the usual deals." South District was a nest of gangs, old warehouses, and alleys that had never once seen daylight. Whispers that were cheap, but something in the way it had been told, the tremor in the man's voice, the quick dart of his eyes, had convinced Silas it was worth a walk in the rain. He turned into a narrow alley off Mercer Street. The walls leaned inward as if conspiring to keep secrets. Trash bags slumped against bricks, and graffiti screamed names that no one spoke in daylight. Silas slowed his steps. It was not caution exactly, but an old habit of measuring distance, of letting his ears stretch further than his eyes. He heard the shuffle first, soft, almost lost under the rain. Then a cough. Wet and tired, Silas stopped. The alley bent ahead, just out of sight, and with it came the unmistakable pressure of being watched. He rested one hand near his coat pocket where a revolver slept. He didn't draw it yet. Drawing too soon was as good as admitting fear. And fear had a scent. Predators could smell it. "Evening," he said into the dark. His voice was low, steady, carrying enough weight to be heard but not enough to echo. Silence answered. Then, from the bend, a figure stepped out, a boy, maybe 16, maybe younger, skin pale under the lamplight, soaked to the bone. His clothes were too thin for the storm, his shoes torn. But what caught Silas's attention was the manila envelope clutched tight against the boy's chest, as if it were more precious than his own heartbeat. "You're Kane?" the boy asked, voice brittle. "Depends who's asking," Silas replied. "They said you'd come." "They said," the boy's words cracked. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes wide, then back to Silas. "They'll kill me if they know I spoke to you." The envelope, the boy's trembling, the rain. Together, it painted a picture Silas knew well. Someone had chosen a pawn, and that pawn had realized too late the cost of being played. "Step out of the alley," Silas said softly. "We'll talk where the walls don't listen." The boy hesitated, clutching the envelope tighter. Then footsteps, heavy, fast, closing in from the far end. The boy's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. "It's too late." Silas's instincts sharpened. The alley was no longer empty. Two men emerged, shoulders wide, faces hidden beneath hoods. Their stride was confident, the kind that didn't bother to hide intent. One carried something metal in his hand, glinting under the broken light. The boy froze. For a moment, the rain was louder than breath, louder than thought. Silas shifted his weight, already calculating distance to cover, angle of escape, how fast his revolver could clear leather, and how long before the men decided talking was a waste. His eyes met the boy's. "Run," Silas said. The boy didn't move. His fear anchored him. The first man spoke, voice thick with menace. "Hand it over, kid, and maybe we'll leave you breathing." The boy shook his head violently, clutching the envelope tighter. Silas sighed inwardly. So, this was how the night was going to play. Not a case, not yet. Just whispers turning into blood. "Problem, gentlemen?" Silas asked, his voice calm as still water. Both men shifted their gaze to him. One sneered. "Walk away, old man. This ain't your business." Silas's hand closed around the grip of his revolver. He felt its familiar weight, cool and steady, the only reliable companion he'd had for years. He didn't draw it. Not yet. Instead, he straightened to his full height, letting the dim light sketch the lines of his face. "That boy asked me for help," Silas said. "That makes it my business." The sneer faltered. Not much, but enough. The man glanced at his partner, and in that hesitation, Silas saw it. Uncertainty. Men who had been sent for cleanup, not confrontation. Still, uncertainty didn't make them less dangerous. The second man raised the metal pipe in his hand, knuckles white. "You don't know what you're walking into, Kane." And there it was. His name, spoken like a curse, the boy gasped. Silas didn't flinch. If they knew his name, then this wasn't random. This was already personal that he gave a slow nod, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then let's get acquainted." The air in the alley thickened, heavy with tension and rain. Silas Kane had stood in countless doorways of violence before, had felt the heartbeat of danger drum against his ribs, and knew exactly when words would dissolve into fists and steel. This moment, he realized, was no different. The boy clutched the envelope like a drowning man clutches driftwood, his eyes wide and searching for rescue. But rescue never came cheap in this city. The taller of the two men swung the pipe casually, the metal hissing through rain like an impatient serpent. "Last chance, Kane," he said. "Walk away." Silas tilted his head slightly, his hat brim dripping a thin curtain of water down his face. He said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence had a weight of its own. It forced the other man to fill the space, to make mistakes. The thug's smirk faltered under the detective's steady gaze. A beat later, he barked, "Fine. Have it your way." He lunged. The pipe came in low, aimed at Silas's ribs. The detective moved before thought, stepping sideways, his coat flaring with emotion. The revolver flashed into his hand, not fired yet, but pointed steady at the man's chest. The suddenness of the draw froze the thug mid-swing, his bravado collapsing in the face of cold steel. But the second man was faster, meaner. He rushed from the boy's side, a knife glinting in his hand. Silas pivoted, his revolver turning with him. But the boy was in the line of fire, frozen like a rabbit in headlights. Silas cursed under his breath and shifted instead. His left arm shot out, catching the knife wielder's wrist. Pain lanced up his arm as the blade skimmed his coat sleeve, but he twisted sharply, wrenching the thug off balance. The boy stumbled backward, pressed against the wall, the envelope never leaving his grip. The first man recovered and came again with the pipe. This time, Silas fired. The gunshot cracked like thunder, echoing off brick and glass. The round buried itself in the wall, just inches from the thug's head. The man froze, rainwater glistening on his terrified face. "I don't miss twice," Silas said flatly. The second man growled, trying to free his wrist from Silas's grip. He slashed wildly with his other hand, the knife grazing Silas's coat. The detective responded with a brutal knee to the gut, the impact stealing the man's breath. He dropped the knife, which clattered into a puddle, swallowed by rain. Silas shoved him backward, his revolver never straying from the first man. Both thugs now hesitated, their confidence draining into the storm. "This envelope," Silas said evenly, nodding toward the boy. "Who wants it?" Neither spoke. Silence, except for the rain. Then the taller one muttered, "You don't know what you're walking into, Kane. You think you're clever, but you're already in too deep." "Story of my life," Silas replied. "Now get out before I decide. I'd rather not hear your voices again." They didn't need a second invitation. One helped the other, both retreating into the dark end of the alley, their threats swallowed by rain. Silas didn't lower his weapon until the sound of their retreat faded into nothing. Only then did he holster it, his hand lingering a moment longer, the way a man does when habit has become second nature. The boy slid down against the wall, gasping, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. His hair clung to his forehead, his thin chest rising and falling in frantic rhythm. "They'll come back," he whispered. "Not tonight," Silas said, his voice calmer than he felt. He knelt beside the boy. "What's your name?" The boy shook his head. "Doesn't matter. If I tell you, you'll be dragged down with me." Silas studied him for a moment. Fear had carved lines into the boy's young face that didn't belong there. Not yet. He'd seen the same look on soldiers who realized they were about to die. Men older than this boy, but with the same wide eyes. "I'm already dragged down," Silas said. "Now, that envelope, what's inside?" The boy hesitated, then slowly extended it toward him. His fingers trembled as if the act of giving it away might seal his fate. Silas accepted it with steady hands. The paper was damp, but intact, sealed tight. No name, no address. Just plain manila, but heavier than it looked. "Why me?" Silas asked quietly. They said you're the only one who doesn't play their game." Silas almost laughed. Almost. If only the boy knew how many games he'd been forced to play, how many compromises had kept him alive in a city where loyalty was a luxury no one could afford. But the boy's faith in him, misplaced or not, struck something deep, something buried. Before he could respond, distant sirens wailed, their red glow faintly bleeding into the rain. The boy stiffened. "No cops," he said quickly. "They're bought. All of them." If they find me, I'm dead. Silas tucked the envelope into the inner pocket of his coat, hidden away. He gave the boy a long look. Then you stick with me, at least until I know what's in this. The boy's lips parted in protest, but no words came. He simply nodded, exhausted. Silas rose, offering him a hand. After a moment's hesitation, the boy took it. His grip was weak, but it was enough to stand. Together, they stepped out of the alley and back into the neon-lit street, rain still drumming around them. Silas glanced once over his shoulder, half expecting to see shadows following, but the alley was empty, whispering only to itself. The case had begun, whether he wanted it or not. The streets glistened like oil-slick glass as Silas Kane guided the boy through the South District. The rain had thinned into a cold drizzle, a mist that lingered over the pavement like smoke from a dying fire. The city was quieter now, though never truly silent. A drunk staggered out of a bar, mumbling to himself. A woman in a fur coat flagged down a cab, her laughter echoing hollowly as she disappeared into the night. The city always played its roles, as if on a stage, never acknowledging the blood being written behind the curtain. Silas walked in measured strides, his coat swaying with each step, the boy trailing close. The detective's mind, however, was elsewhere, turning over the envelope like a puzzle box he couldn't yet open. They reached his office on Ashford Street, a building older than the city itself. 3 stories of crumbling stone, windows fogged with grime, its only charm being that nobody else wanted to live there. Silas preferred it that way. Privacy was as valuable as bullets in his world. He led the boy inside. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and ink. The detective's office was a wide room cluttered with case files, a scarred oak desk, and a single lamp casting a tired glow across the wood. The walls bore maps of the city, with pins and strings connecting districts like arteries and veins. The boy stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the floor. He looked like he might bolt at any second. "Sit," Silas said gently, motioning toward the worn leather chair opposite his desk. The boy obeyed, folding into the chair as if it might swallow him whole. Silas took off his coat, draped it across the stand, and placed the envelope carefully on his desk. His revolver rested within arm's reach, though he doubted the boy had the courage or reason to lunge for it. "Now," Silas said, lowering himself into his chair, "tell me what I'm holding." The boy swallowed hard. His voice cracked when he spoke. "It's proof of everything. Everything's a tall order," Silas murmured. The boy shook his head violently. "I mean it. Names, places, deals, even the cops they bought. If you open that, you'll see what I'm talking about." Silas studied him for a long moment. Rain tapped gently at the window, the sound like impatient fingers. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he unsealed the envelope. The paper gave a soft tear, fragile but final, like the first chord in a funeral march. Inside were photographs, grainy, some taken in alleys, some in offices. Men in expensive suits shaking hands with tattooed gang lieutenants. A judge slipping an envelope across a table. A police captain standing beside a man Silas recognized instantly. Marco Vitelli, head of the Vitelli crime family, whose grip on the city's throat had choked more men than disease or poverty ever had. There were ledgers, too. Pages of coded transactions, shipments, names reduced to initials but clear enough to those who knew where to look. And then there was a single photograph, different from the others. It was older, edges curled, colors washed in sepia. It showed a man in military fatigues, standing beside 2 others in a foreign desert. The man's face was sharp, unmistakable. Silas froze when he saw IT was his own. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the lamp. Silas's hand tightened on the photograph, his heartbeat slowing to a dangerous calm. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. The boy shrank into the chair. I don't know. It was already in there. I swear." Silas closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose. Whoever had given the boy this envelope hadn't just wanted the city's corruption exposed. They wanted him in the crosshairs, too. The game wasn't about crime anymore. It was personal. He slipped the photo back into the envelope, masking his reaction. The boy didn't need to see the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. "You understand what you're carrying," Silas said, more a statement than a question. The boy nodded shakily. "That's why they're after me. I was supposed to deliver it to someone else, but I ran. I thought maybe if I found you, I'd stand a chance." Silas leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He could feel the weight of choices pressing down. To keep the boy meant painting a target on both their backs. To send him away meant almost certain death. Neither option ended cleanly. He studied the boy again. His clothes, his eyes, the way he flinched at every sound. He wasn't lying. Not yet. But fear could twist anyone into a liar when survival was at stake. That a knock shattered the silence. 3 sharp raps on the office door. The boy jumped as Silas's revolver was in his hand before the echo faded. He motioned silently for the boy to stay put, then moved to the door with deliberate steps. Another knock, slower this time. "Who is it?" Silas called. And O answered. He opened the door, just a crack, revolver raised. The hallway was empty. Only the flickering light bulb buzzed overhead. Then he noticed it. A playing card slipped under the doorframe. The Queen of Spades. Silas bent, picked it up, and turned it over. Scrawled across the back in red ink were 4 words. "Welcome to the game." His jaw tightened. Behind him, the boy whispered, "What does it mean?" Silas slid the card into his coat pocket, his eyes never leaving the dark hallway beyond. "It means," he said quietly, "we're already being watched." The door shut with a hollow thud. The boy's breathing quickened. "What do we do?" Silas holstered his revolver, extinguished the lamp, and let the room fall into darkness. "We survive," he said, and in the silence that followed, the city outside seemed to lean closer, its whispers crawling through the rain-soaked night. The haunting had begun. The morning came with no sun, only a heavy blanket of gray clouds pressing down on the city. Rain still lingered, dripping from rooftops in steady rhythms, as though the storm refused to let go of the streets. Silas Kane hadn't slept. Sleep had become more of a visitor than a resident in his life, coming when it pleased, leaving when it wished. Tonight, it hadn't come at all as he sat at his desk, coat still on, hat tilted back, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. Across from him, the boy had dozed off in the leather chair, his chin tucked to his chest, the envelope balanced on his lap like a newborn. The lamplight, now faint with the coming day, drew hollow shadows across the room. Silas's eyes kept returning to the photograph, the one that shouldn't have been there. The one of him. He had left that part of his life behind long ago, buried in foreign soil and memory. And yet, someone had dug it up, placed it inside the envelope alongside ledgers and proof of corruption, and delivered it straight into his hands. That wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. He tapped ash into the tray, his mind working like gears grinding against rust. Whoever orchestrated this wanted him involved, wanted him pulled in deep, and they had used the boy to make sure of it. The boy stirred, eyelids fluttering open. He sat upright quickly, clutching the envelope as though he feared it had vanished in his sleep. His eyes darted toward Silas, then to the door, then back again. "You kept watch?" the boy asked, voice hoarse. "Someone had to," Silas muttered, stubbing out his cigarette. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions. Finally, Silas leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. "You said this envelope is proof. Ledgers, names, transactions. Whose ledger are we talking about?" The boy's fingers tightened on the envelope. His lips trembled before words finally came. "Henry Cole." Silas's eyes narrowed. He knew the name. Everyone did. Henry Cole had been a financier, a quiet man who'd climbed the city's social ladder not with charm or blood, but with numbers. He kept books for the Vitelli family, tracked their earnings, laundered their profits. But 3 months ago, Cole had turned up dead, shot twice in the chest, dumped in a river. The papers had called it a mugging gone wrong. Silas had never bought that story. "Cole's ledger," Silas said slowly, piecing it together. "They said it was lost, burned with him." The boy shook his head violently. "Not all of it. He made copies, pages, notes. He was going to sell them or trade them, I don't know. But someone killed him before he could. And this," Silas tapped the envelope, Is one of those copies? The boy nodded. Silas leaned back, exhaling slowly. The city had been hunting Cole's ledger since the day the body was pulled from the river. Crime families wanted it buried. The police wanted it silenced. And now it had landed on his desk, soaked in rain and blood. He looked at the boy. How did you get it? The boy hesitated. His eyes dropped to the floor, then to the window where the rain streaked down like prison bars. What? I found it, he whispered. Silas didn't buy that for a second. Found it where? The boy swallowed. At Cole's apartment. After he died. It was hidden. Someone told me where to look. Who? The boy's silence was answer enough. His shoulders trembled, fear tightening around him like rope. Whoever had pointed him toward the ledger had left their mark on him, whether through threats or loyalty. Silas let the pause stretch, then finally said, "All right, keep your secrets. But understand this, secrets don't last long in this city. They get dragged out into the open one way or another. And when they do, it's never gentle." The boy nodded faintly, as though he already knew. Silas stood, pulling the envelope toward him. He slipped out one of the ledger pages and studied the neat columns of numbers and codes. Beneath them were initials, places, shipments. One entry caught his eye. SD Doc 17, Tuesday, 2 a.m. That was tonight. His jaw tightened. Whoever Cole had been tracking, their operations were still moving. Doc 17 was in South District, near the old warehouses, a breeding ground for contraband. If Silas wanted answers, that was where they'd be. He slid the pages back into the envelope, then tucked it inside his coat. "Get your strength back," he told the boy. "We've got a long night ahead." The boy's eyes widened. "You're going to the docks?" Silas didn't answer. He moved to the window, staring out at the wet, waking city. The rain had slowed, but the sky remained iron gray. Somewhere out there, men were already moving crates, whispering names, keeping accounts. Somewhere out there, answers waited, but so did bullets. He lit another cigarette, the smoke curling upward like a ghost. In the reflection of the glass, he saw the boy still clutching the chair, his small frame dwarfed by the room. Silas wondered, not for the first time, why he cared. Why not throw the envelope in the river, let the boy vanish into the streets, and let the city choke on its own secrets? But then he remembered the photograph, his own face staring back at him from the envelope's heart. No, this wasn't just about Cole's ledger. This was about him. The game had started, and he was already a piece on the board. And pieces didn't choose when to move. The city transformed after dark. By day, the docks were a mess of laborers, cranes groaning against the skyline, ships unloading their steel bellies of cargo. But by night, the machinery stilled and another life stirred, a quieter, more dangerous one. The official business of trade gave way to the unofficial business of smuggling, and Dock 17 was one of the worst-kept secrets in South District. Silas Kane knew the rhythm of these places. He had walked docks like these in half a dozen countries, some as a soldier, others as a shadow. The sea air smelled the same everywhere, salt and rust, mingled with diesel and the faint sweetness of rot. Tonight, the mist off the water clung to his coat, curling around his face like a living thing. That he and the boy moved carefully along the edge of the pier. The boy's shoes slapped too loudly on the wet boards, every sound magnified by the stillness. Silas motioned sharply with a hand. Quieter. The boy nodded, trying to match Silas's silent tread. Though fear made him clumsy, ahead, the warehouse loomed. Number 17, its paint long peeled away, windows dark except for a single strip of yellow light that bled through a gap in the planks. Voices carried from inside, muffled but urgent, the kind of voices men used when money was on the table and violence sat waiting in a corner. Silas crouched near a stack of crates. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, not to smoke, but to have something in his fingers. Habit. Focus. His other hand rested lightly on the revolver beneath his coat. "You stay here," he whispered to the boy. The boy's eyes widened. "What if they see me?" "They won't if you stay put. And if they do, run. Don't wait for me." The boy looked as though he wanted to protest, but Silas's tone brooked no argument. He settled back against the crates, hugging his knees, eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. Silas moved forward alone. The closer he crept to the warehouse, the clearer the voices became. He could make out fragments, numbers, shipments, dates. A man laughed, low and mean. Another cursed softly. And then, the scrape of chalk on a board, he found a narrow gap in the planks and peered inside. The scene was as he expected. 5 men gathered around a makeshift table, stacks of papers spread across it. At the center stood a ledger, thicker, newer than the one in his coat. The man writing in it was tall, shoulders like stone, a scar running from his ear to his jaw. Silas recognized him instantly. Rocco Vitelli, Marco's younger brother, enforcer turned accountant. A dangerous man, not for his strength, but for his memory. Rocco never forgot a debt. The others were lieutenants, faces Silas had seen in mugshots, barrooms, and crime scene photos. They were discussing shipments, crates of weapons, shipments of heroin, coded through initials and dock numbers. And then Silas saw something that froze him out on the far side of the table. Beside the ledger lay a photograph. Even from this distance, even through the narrow crack, he knew it. His stomach tightened. It was the same military photo that had been in the envelope. His face, his past. Out in the open among Vitelli men, a low curse slipped between his teeth. Whoever had placed that photo in Cole's ledger hadn't just been baiting him. They'd already fed his history into the Vitelli's hands that a sudden clatter jolted him. Behind, near the crates, the boy had shifted. The sound echoed across the pier. Silas's blood ran cold. Inside the warehouse, the voices stopped. Chairs scraped. A man barked. You hear that? Footsteps. Heavy. Moving toward the door. Silas moved fast, slipping back through the shadows, every muscle coiled. The boy's wide eyes met his, terror plain as daylight. Run, Silas hissed, but it was too late. The warehouse door groaned open, spilling yellow light onto the pier. 2 men stepped out, revolvers drawn, scanning the mist. Silas pushed the boy down behind the crates, flattening them both against the wood. He counted heartbeats, the thud of boots on planks, the metallic click of a revolver being cocked. The men stopped. One muttered, "Could have sworn I heard." The other cut him off. "Shut it. Check the pier." They split, one heading left, the other right. Silas waited, muscles tense, until the closer one's back turned. Then, with a motion practiced and deadly, he rose, pressed the muzzle of his revolver into the man's side, and whispered, "Quiet." The thug stiffened. Before he could react, Silas's arm looped around his neck, dragging him back into the shadows. A sharp twist, a muffled grunt, and the man crumpled silently to the ground, unconscious. The boy stared, horrified and awed, as Silas crouched low again. The second man was still prowling the pier, revolver raised, eyes scanning the mist. Silas leaned close to the boy, his breath steady despite the pounding in his chest. "Stay down, no matter what happens." Then he slipped away, moving like a shadow across the boards. The second man paused near the water's edge, frowning into the fog. He never saw Silas coming. The detective's revolver cracked once, the shot muffled against the roar of the sea. The man fell, weapon clattering across the pier. Inside the warehouse, voices shouted, chairs scraped, men barked orders. They knew something was wrong. Silas grabbed the boy's arm. "We're leaving. Now." Together, they ran, boots slapping against wet boards, mist curling in their wake. Behind them, the warehouse erupted in chaos. Shouts, gunfire, the sharp echo of boots chasing into the night. They sprinted past the pier's edge, down into a side alley where shadows swallowed them whole. Silas pressed the boy against the wall, listening, revolver still warm in his hand. The voices grew fainter, scattered in different directions. They'd lost them, for now. The boy gasped, clutching his chest. "They had your picture. Why did they have your picture?" Silas stared into the dark, jaw tight. His mind turned over the image of Rocco Vitelli's scarred face leaning over that photograph, his name etched in ledgers alongside shipments and debts. Because Silas said grimly, "Someone wants me buried in this mess just as much as Cole." The boy's breath hitched. "Then what do we do?" Silas holstered his revolver, eyes still scanning the shadows. "We find the rest of the ledger, before the Vitelli's do. And somewhere in the distance, A foghorn bellowed, long and mournful, as if the sea itself knew what was coming. The city never offered true silence. Even in the dead hours before dawn, when the streets were mostly empty and the rain had slowed to a drizzle, it whispered. A drunk arguing with himself in an alley. A stray dog nosing through garbage. The distant rattle of a train pulling across rusted tracks. Silas Kane knew those whispers well. They were the pulse of a city that thrived on secrets. Tonight, they followed him all the way to the north end, where the river bent like a crooked spine and old tenements leaned over narrow streets. He hadn't planned to bring the boy, but leaving him behind was more dangerous than dragging him along. The Vitellis had a scent now, and the boy was part of that. Better to keep him close. The kid kept pace, though his breath came in quick bursts, his shoes squelching with every step. "Where are we going?" he asked finally, his voice thin with exhaustion. "To someone who knew Henry Cole," Silas said. The boy hesitated. "Can you trust them?" Silas almost smiled at that. Trust isn't a word I use often. They stopped outside a dimly lit bar wedged between two shuttered storefronts. Its sign, "The Mariner's Rest," flickered weakly, half its letters dead. The smell of stale beer and salt water clung to the brick walls. It wasn't the kind of place one stumbled into by accident. Inside, the bar was nearly empty. Two men hunched over their drinks at the far end, eyes fixed firmly on the wood in front of them. A jukebox murmured a tune too quiet to recognize. Behind the counter, polishing a glass with a rag older than the boy, stood a woman. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with dark hair pulled back tight. She didn't look up when the door opened, but when Silas approached, her gaze flicked to him, and for a moment the hardness in her face cracked into something like recognition. "Kane," she said flatly. "Haven't seen you in years." "Lucky you," Silas replied, pulling off his hat. "We need to talk, Anna. Anna Ruiz. Once a bookkeeper, then a bartender, now something in between. More importantly, she had been Henry Cole's confidant. If anyone knew where the rest of the ledger might be, it was her. Her eyes shifted to the boy, then back to Silas. "You brought company. He's part of this mess," Silas said simply. The boy fidgeted under her stare. She shrugged and set the glass down. "Fine. But if the Vitellis are sniffing around, you're putting my bar on their map. And I don't like that." "They're already circling," Silas said, sliding onto a stool. "What I need is information. Cole's ledger. How much of it did he leave behind?" Anna's jaw tightened. She reached under the counter and pulled out a bottle, poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. She slid one towards Silas. "He told me if anything happened to him, people would come looking. I didn't think it'd be you." "I didn't think it'd be me either," Silas muttered, taking the glass. She leaned in slightly, her voice low. Cole was smarter than he let on. He knew he was a dead man walking. Kept copies of everything. Not just ledgers. Letters, photos, names of men you wouldn't believe. He said if he went down, he wasn't going alone. Silas's mind worked quickly. "Where are they?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Hidden. And if I tell you, Kane, it won't just be the Vitellis after me. It'll be half this damn city." Silas met her gaze. "They're already after you. The difference is whether you want to go down blind or see it coming." The boy shifted nervously, hugging himself against the chill creeping through the bar. Anna studied Silas for a long time before finally sighing. Cole rented a locker at the old Union Rail Depot. Said if anything happened, that's where the truth would sit waiting. "But Kane," her eyes darkened, "if you open that, there's no shutting it again. You'll drag out names that don't just belong to gangsters. Judges, senators, police chiefs, everyone with a hand in this city's throat. You'll be signing your death warrant." Silas drained his glass in one swallow, the burn cutting through the fog of fatigue. "Death warrants don't scare me, but lies do." Anna shook her head. "Still the same fool you always were." Before Silas could respond, the bar's door creaked open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain. 3 men stepped inside, their coats too long, their eyes too sharp. Vitelli men, the room froze. The 2 drunks at the far table suddenly found reasons to leave, slipping out the back like rats sensing fire. Anna's hand drifted beneath the counter, no doubt toward the shotgun Silas knew she kept there. The men spread out, one lingering near the door, the other two moving closer. Their leader smiled thinly. "Kane," he said, "you're a hard man to track." Silas didn't move, didn't blink. His revolver rested in its holster, his hand a breath away from it. "You should have stayed out of this," the man continued. "Cole's business died with him. You keep poking, you'll join him." The boy stiffened, gripping the edge of his stool so tight his knuckles went white. Anna's eyes flicked to Silas, then back to the man. The tension thickened, pressing the air flat. Silas let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then he said softly, "If Cole's business really died with him, you wouldn't be here." The man's smile faded. His hand drifted inside his coat. The next moment broke like glass. Chairs scraped, wood cracked, a bottle shattered. Anna ducked behind the counter, shotgun pumping once with a mechanical click. The boy dove to the floor, covering his head. Silas was already moving, revolver clearing leather, smoke splitting the air. The bar exploded into chaos. The roar of gunfire cracked through the mariner's rest, each shot snapping the air like a whip. Bottles burst along the shelves, raining glass across the counter. The jukebox sputtered, the tune dying mid-note. Smoke from gunpowder thickened quickly, mixing with the sour stench of spilled whiskey. Silas Kane moved like instinct, not thought. His revolver barked once, twice. The first bullet clipped the Vitelli thug by the door, spinning him backward into the wall. The second tore through a bottle, showering another man with liquor and shards. Anna Ruiz, crouched behind the counter, pumped her shotgun and fired. The blast lit up the bar in a burst of orange flame, sending buckshot through wood and plaster. One of the thugs cried out, clutching his arm, stumbling toward the floor. The boy lay flat, covering his head with both arms, his breath sharp and panicked. Silas's gaze flicked to him just long enough to know he was alive. That was all that mattered for now. "Out the back," Anna shouted, her voice rough over the thunder of weapons. But the thugs weren't retreating. They pressed forward, determined to pin Silas where he stood. He dropped behind an overturned table as a hail of bullets chewed into the wood, splinters flying across his face. His revolver was nearly empty, 3 rounds left. Not enough that he took a breath, steadying the rhythm of his heart. Fear was there, yes, but it sharpened him rather than dulled him. Fear kept him alive. The leader of the Vitelli crew stalked forward, gun leveled. His face was a mask of fury, lit only by the jittering glow of the flickering sign outside. "Kane," he bellowed, "you're dead. You hear me? Dead." Silas let the words hang, let the man believe he had control. Then, with a sudden motion, he popped up from cover, sighted the man's chest, and fired once. The revolver bucked in his hand. The leader staggered, disbelief painted across his face, before crashing into the jukebox with a hollow thud. The other 2 men froze, panic flickering in their eyes. For the first time, they seemed to realize what they'd walked into, a storm they couldn't weather. One dragged his wounded partner toward the door, firing wildly as cover. The remaining bottles shattered, liquor pooling across the floor that Anna's shotgun boomed again, chasing them into the night. Silence followed, heavy, ringing silence broken only by the drip of liquor and the boy's ragged breathing. Silas stood slowly, smoke curling from the barrel of his revolver. He exhaled, the adrenaline still humming in his veins. The leader lay crumpled near the jukebox, unmoving. The others had fled, but they'd be back. Vitelli's men always came back. Anna rose from behind the counter, her eyes scanning the damage. Her bar looked like a battlefield. She cursed under her breath, then leaned the shotgun against her shoulder. "You sure know how to bring hell through a door, Kane," she muttered. "Hell was already coming," Silas said. He checked the boy, shaken but unharmed. "I just answered the invitation." Anna gave a humorless laugh, then bent to drag the dead man toward the back. "This one's not staying here. I'll deal with him. You get moving. You've stirred a hornet's nest, and they'll swarm soon." Silas hesitated, his gaze on her. Despite her sharpness, there was steel in her veins. She'd chosen her side without hesitation. "You didn't have to stand with me." "I didn't," she said flatly. "But Henry Cole was my friend. And if his ghost is rattling chains from the grave, Then maybe it's time someone listened. Silas nodded once. Respect, nothing more. Then he turned to the boy. Come on. They slipped out the back into an alley drenched in rainwater and neon light. The city beyond glowed faintly, its skyline jagged with towers, smoke rising from chimneys, neon signs buzzing with false promises. A red glow washed across their faces as a casino sign blinked all-night luck. Silas adjusted his hat, scanning the alley. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every corner smelled of danger. The boy tugged at his sleeve. Where now? Silas looked down at him. The boy's face was pale, streaked with dirt and fear, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone his age. To the Union Rail Depot, Silas said quietly. Cole's locker. If the rest of the ledger is there, it's the only way we'll get ahead of Atelli. The boy nodded, though his throat worked nervously. They walked in silence, the city wrapping around them like a predator waiting for its chance to pounce. Silas's mind kept circling back to Anna's words. Judges, senators, police chiefs. If the ledger truly named them, then this wasn't just a fight with Atelli. It was a fight with the whole rotten skeleton of the city. And skeletons didn't fall apart easily as they reached the main street. The neon lights blinked overhead, casting their faces in alternating colors, blue, red, green. Cars hissed past on wet pavement. Music thumped faintly from clubs down the block. Men and women staggered beneath umbrellas, unaware or unwilling to notice the war unfolding beneath their feet. Silas Kane lit a cigarette, his hand steady despite the chaos he'd just left. Smoke curled upward, vanishing into the rain. The boy watched him, wide-eyed, as though the cigarette itself was a kind of armor. Do you ever get scared? The boy asked suddenly. Silas let the smoke roll from his lips, then glanced down at him. Every damn day. Then why keep going? Silas thought of the photograph in the envelope, the one of him pulled from the shadows of his past. He thought of the dead man's ledger, pages inked with betrayal. He thought of Henry Cole, floating in the river with 2 holes in his chest. Because if you stop, Silas said softly, fear wins. The boy didn't reply. He didn't need to. They both knew there was no turning back. Ahead, the neon lights glowed brighter, leading them toward the heart of the city. And beneath that glow, beneath the smoke and lies, truth waited, sharp as a blade. The Union Rail Depot was a relic from another age, grand once, when trains carried the promise of prosperity across steel veins that stretched from coast to coast. But prosperity had long fled this city, and the depot had become a carcass. Its glass ceiling sagged, cracked, and patched with tar. Its once proud clock tower leaned, frozen at 3:10. The platforms were mostly empty now, save for a few stragglers waiting for midnight freights or hiding from debts they couldn't pay. Silas and the boy approached from the west entrance, where weeds grew between the stones and rats scurried through puddles. The neon lights of the city pulsed faintly behind them, but here, beneath the depot's vast canopy, everything was shadows and echoes. The boy shivered, pulling his jacket tighter. Doesn't feel safe. Silas gave him a brief look. It isn't. Inside, the depot smelled of rust, old coal, and damp wood. Benches were cracked and carved with graffiti. A few broken light fixtures flickered above, buzzing faintly like flies. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistled. A lonely, hollow sound that carried too long that Silas's boots echoed against the stone floor as he led the boy toward the row of lockers along the east wall. Hundreds of them lined the corridor, dull metal doors, most rusted, some broken open. Each one looked the same, but Silas knew the number, 317. Anna Ruiz had spoken it low, as if the very digits could summon danger. The boy trailed close, his eyes darting constantly, never resting. What if they're waiting for us? He whispered. They're always waiting, Silas said. When they reached the lockers, Silas paused. His eyes scanned the hall, the rafters above, the shadows that clustered thick in the corners. Nothing moved, yet the silence was too complete, as though the building itself were holding its breath. He crouched before locker 317. The paint was flaking, the lock heavy with rust. Reaching into his coat, he produced a small set of picks. tools of a trade he never admitted to, but ones he carried as faithfully as his revolver. The boy crouched beside him, whispering, "You know how to do that?" Silas gave a small grunt. "I've had practice." He slipped the pick into the lock, twisting, listening for the clicks. His breathing slowed, every sound amplified. The boy's nervous fidgeting, the distant clatter of a train car, the drip of water through the ceiling. Finally, the lock gave a reluctant snap. Silas pulled the door open. Inside sat a weathered leather satchel, its straps cracked with age. Dust clung to it like a shroud. The boy leaned forward wide-eyed. "Is that it?" Silas didn't answer. He lifted the satchel carefully, as though it might explode. The weight of it was unmistakable, thick, heavy with paper and secrets. He laid it on the floor, unbuckling the straps. Inside were ledgers, 3 of them, bound in faded leather. Alongside them were envelopes stuffed with photographs and typewritten sheets. Silas flipped open the first ledger. The handwriting was Cole's, cramped but precise. Dates, numbers, shipments, payments. Names scrawled in margins. The boy pointed to one entry. "That's Judge Harriman. I know that name. He's in the papers all the time." Silas's jaw tightened. The judge's name was beside a figure, $10,000. Next to it, a single word cleared as he turned the page. More names. A police captain, a union boss, a senator, each one tied to sums of money, favors, disappearances. The ledger wasn't just a record of Vitelli's empire. It was a map of the city's corruption, proof that the rot reached every corner of power. Silas closed the book slowly, his pulse steady, but his mind racing. Henry Cole hadn't just collected dirt. He dug up the bones of the city itself as he glanced at the boy. The kid was staring at the pages with something between awe and fear. "If this is real," the boy whispered, "then the whole city's rotten." "It's real," Silas said grimly. "And it's why Cole died." Before he could say more, a sound echoed from the far end of the hall. A footstep. Silas froze. The boy stiffened, his eyes darting toward the shadows. Another step followed, then another. Slow, measured. Silas snapped the ledger shut and slid it back into the satchel. His revolver was in his hand a heartbeat later, the barrel aimed at the dark corridor, but a figure emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette sharp against the dim glow of a broken lamp. He wore a long coat and a fedora tilted low. Smoke curled from the cigarette dangling at his lips. Well, the man drawled, his voice carrying easily. "Kane, I should have known you'd be sniffing around Cole's grave." The boy whispered, "Who is that?" Silas's grip tightened on his revolver. He knew the voice. He hadn't heard it in years, but it cut like a knife through memory. "Marcus Vale," Silas said quietly. The man stepped closer, the light catching his face. Scarred jaw, eyes like steel, a smile that never reached them. Marcus Vale, the enforcer once thought dead, a ghost of the city's bloodiest days. He had been Vitelli's right hand before disappearing into rumor. And now he was here. Vale's smile widened. "Looks like you found something that doesn't belong to you." The boy's breath caught. Silas didn't move, didn't lower his gun. Inside, though, a storm gathered. Memories of old jobs, old betrayals, and a night Marcus Vale vanished in a pool of blood that never seemed to dry. The past had just stepped out of the shadows, and it wanted what Silas held. Marcus Vale's footsteps echoed across the empty depot floor, deliberate and unhurried. He moved like a predator, closing the gap, certain his prey had nowhere to run. The boy edged behind Silas, his small frame trembling, his breath sharp and uneven. Silas didn't take his eyes off Vale. His revolver remained steady, aimed dead center at the man's chest. He'd seen Marcus Vale survive bullets before, walk through fights that would have broken lesser men. The scar carved across his jaw was proof of how close he'd come to death, and how stubbornly he refused it. Vale drew on his cigarette, the ember flaring red in the dim light. He exhaled slowly, the smoke drifting upward like a serpent. "Still the same, Kane. Still hiding behind orphans and lost causes. Tell me, does it ever get tiring? Carrying the weight of a city that doesn't want to be saved." Silas's voice was low, calm. Better than carrying the blood of every soul you crushed under Vitelli's boot. Vale chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Ah, the moral crusader. You never learned, did you? This city isn't saved, Kane. It's bought. It's sold. And you, he pointed lazily with a cigarette, you're still trying to swim upstream with a bullet in your gut. Silas didn't blink. Maybe, but I'm still here. The silence stretched. Vale flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushing the ember beneath his boot. Then, in a fluid motion, he drew his weapon, a heavy revolver that gleamed under the broken lights. The boy gasped, but Silas's hand clamped on his shoulder, steadying him. His eyes stayed locked on Vale. Back then, Vale said, his tone darkening, "You left me to bleed out in the docks. Thought I was finished. You should have put me in the ground, Kane, because now I get to return the favor." He leveled his gun. The depot air tightened, silence broken only by the distant rumble of a passing freight. Silas moved first. His revolver roared, the shot flashing bright in the dim hall. Vale twisted, the bullet grazing his coat. His return fire was immediate, the slug screaming past Silas's head to bury itself in the lockers behind him. The boy ducked low, hands pressed over his ears. Silas dove behind a bench, splinters flying as another shot tore through the wood. He peered out just long enough to send another round toward Vale, who rolled behind a column, his laughter echoing off the rafters. "Still quick, Kane," Vale called. "But you're slower than you used to be." Silas gritted his teeth. He was down to 4 rounds. Vale had at least 5, and the boy was caught in the middle. He motioned for the boy to stay low, then slipped along the row of lockers, his coat brushing the cold metal. Every step was measured, his breath controlled. He could feel Vale stalking him in parallel, the game of hunter and hunted twisting with every echo. Then silence. Silas froze, pressing his back to the lockers, revolver raised. His ears strained for the faintest sound. A drip of water, a rat scurrying, the boy's shallow breathing. And then, behind him, Vale's voice, low and close. Too slow. Silas spun, firing instinctively. The muzzle flare lit Vale's face for an instant, snarling, alive. The bullet tore through his coat, but Vale's arm came crashing down, the revolver in his grip slamming across Silas's jaw. Pain exploded white-hot. Silas staggered, vision blurring. Vale pressed in, striking again, fists like hammers. The boy screamed. Silas stumbled back against a locker, breath ragged, blood dripping from his lip. Vale loomed, gun raised, smile like a wolf's. This is where it ends, Kane. But Silas's eyes were sharp, even through the haze. He saw the loose chain hanging from the rafters above, swaying gently in the draft. He saw the heavy cargo hook still attached to it. And he saw the chance that A.S. Vale pulled the trigger. Silas lunged sideways, the shot tearing sparks from the locker. He grabbed the chain and yanked with all the strength left in him. The hook swung down, catching Vale across the shoulder with a sickening crack. Vale roared in pain, stumbling back, his gun clattering to the floor. Silas didn't hesitate. He surged forward, slamming his fist into Vale's scarred jaw, then driving his knee into the man's ribs. Vale crashed against the lockers, the metal groaning under his weight. But Marcus Vale was not a man easily broken. He snarled, surging up with fists flying, tackling Silas to the ground. The 2 men rolled across the stone floor, each strike echoing in the hollow depot. The boy scrambled forward, shouting, "Silas!" Silas's vision blurred with sweat and blood. Vale's hands closed around his throat, iron tight. The world narrowed, black creeping in from the edges. But Silas's hand found something, cold steel against the floor. Vale's revolver. With the last of his strength, Silas wrenched it up and fired. The blast thundered through the hall. Vale's body jerked, then slumped heavily against him. The weight was immense, suffocating, until Silas shoved the corpse aside, gasping for air. The boy was at his side instantly, wide-eyed, trembling. Are you alive?" Silas coughed, pushing himself up on shaking arms. For now, Vale lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, the smile finally gone. Silas wiped his mouth, his hand trembling only slightly. He retrieved the satchel, clutching it tight. The weight of the ledgers seemed heavier now, as though Vale's blood had seeped into the pages. "Come on," he rasped. "We're leaving." They stumbled out of the depot into the night. Rain had begun again, soft but steady, slicking the streets with reflection. Neon lights shimmered across the puddles, red, blue, green, dancing over the wet asphalt. The boy walked close, glancing back constantly, as though Vale might rise from the grave and follow. Silas lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the weariness in his eyes. He drew in smoke, steadying himself. Was he an old friend? The boy asked hesitantly. Silas exhaled, watching the smoke mingle with the rain. Something like that. They moved on, swallowed by the city's glow. Behind them, the depot loomed, silent once more, save for the echoes of violence that would cling to its walls, and ahead, beneath the smoke and neon, the truth still waited. The rain had not stopped since the depot. It came in waves, sometimes a mist so fine it seemed the city itself exhaled sorrow, sometimes a downpour that rattled tin roofs and flooded alleys until the gutters overflowed. The cobblestones in the old quarter glistened under the gas lamps, their uneven surfaces slick with water, dark stains seeping into the cracks. The smell was sharp, wet stone, rotting wood, and faint copper, as if the city bled through its own skin. Silas Kane walked those streets with the boy at his side. The satchel carrying the ledger was slung over his shoulder, the leather damp and heavy, its contents rattling with every step. Silas's body ached from the fight with Marcus Vale, his ribs bruised, his jaw tender, his throat raw where Vale's hand had tried to squeeze the life from him. But the deeper ache was in his chest, an old familiar weight he never managed to shake. The quiet grief that came with each body left behind. The boy hadn't spoken much since the depot. He clung to the silence, his small steps echoing beside Silas's longer strides. From time to time, he would glance up at Silas as though trying to read his face in the shadows. Silas didn't meet his gaze. They reached a narrow square tucked between two crumbling churches, where the cobblestones were stained darker than anywhere else. This was where Silas had once stood years ago, long before the boy was born, when a mob hit had turned the square into a slaughterhouse. Blood had filled the gutters then, running in streams down toward the river. He remembered standing ankle-deep in it, cigarette smoke curling from his lips, staring at the corpses of men who'd thought themselves untouchable. He remembered because one of those corpses had been a friend. The square was quiet now, save for the rain tapping against the eaves of abandoned houses. But ghosts lingered. Silas felt them pressing against the corners of his mind. He knew the boy felt it too, because the boy stopped walking, clutching his coat tighter. "Why here?" the boy asked softly. Silas lit a cigarette, shielding the match from the rain with his palm. The flame flickered, briefly illuminating the lines of his face, the weariness, the half-healed cut on his cheek, the shadows under his eyes. He inhaled deeply, smoke mingling with mist. "Because this city remembers," Silas said. "Even when the people forget, the stones don't. Every drop of blood spilled here stays. The cobblestones drink it, hold it, whisper it back when the rain falls." The boy shivered, though whether from the cold or Silas's words, Silas couldn't tell. "You sound like you've been here before," the boy said. Silas's eyes traced the cracks in the stone, the places where water collected dark and deep. His voice lowered. "I have." The memory came unbidden. Flashes of gunfire, screams muffled by the storm, the weight of a dying man in his arms. He had been younger then, reckless, still believing in a kind of justice that was clean. That night had carved it out of him, leaving something harder, colder. He forced the memory down. The boy didn't need to know that part of him. Not yet. Instead, he said, "This is where we'll meet him." "Meet who?" "An informant. Calls himself Moth." The boy frowned. "Like the insect?" Silas smirked faintly. "He says he's drawn to danger the way moths are drawn to flame, always hovering where he shouldn't. But he's got eyes in places most men can't reach. If anyone knows what Vitelli's ledger really means, it's him." The boy nodded, though his unease lingered. He scanned the square nervously, as though expecting shadows to detach from the walls and swallow them whole. Silas remained still, smoking, every sense alert. His ears strained against the rain. His eyes searched the corners, the doorways, the rooftops. Years of work in the underworld had taught him one thing. Informants came with risk. Sometimes they delivered truth. Sometimes they delivered death. A figure finally appeared, moving with a curious rhythm. Too graceful to be drunk, too deliberate to be careless. He emerged from the darkness of an alley, his thin frame draped in a patched coat, his face half hidden beneath the brim of a hat. He moved like a shadow that had learned to wear human skin. "Moth," Silas said quietly. The figure approached, his smile crooked, his eyes glinting like shards of glass. "Detective Kane, always a pleasure to see a man who refuses to stay buried." His voice was high, almost sing-song, but edged with danger. Silas let the cigarette burn low. "You said you had something." Moth tilted his head, his gaze flicking briefly to the boy. "You brought a stray, brave, or foolish?" Silas's jaw tightened. "Leave him out of it." Moth chuckled softly. "Fair enough. But understand, Kane, the streets don't leave anyone out of it. Sooner or later, the blood finds you." He stepped closer, his shoes clicking against the cobblestones. He smelled faintly of whiskey and dust. From inside his coat, he pulled a small folded note, sealed in wax. He held it delicately, as though it might vanish in the rain. "This," Moth said, "was meant for Vitelli, but it found its way to me instead. Call it divine intervention." Silas took the note, sliding it into his pocket without opening it yet. His eyes stayed on Moth. "What's in it?" "Names," Moth said softly. "Dates. Codes that even the ledger can't explain without it. This is the spine of Vitelli's operation. Without it, the ledger is just bones. With it, you see the monster hole." The boy's eyes widened. Silas remained unreadable. He lit another cigarette from the dying ember of the first. "And what do you want for it?" Silas asked up. Moth's smile widened. "Nothing, detective. For now. But someday, I'll need a favor. And you'll remember tonight." The rain intensified, hammering down on the square. Silas studied Moth's pale face, searching for lies. But with men like him, truth and lies were woven from the same thread. You only knew which was which when it was too late. Finally, Silas gave a small nod. "Then I'll remember." Moth tipped his hat, retreating toward the alley. "Good, because others will too. Watch your back, Kane. The cobblestones drink blood, but they also scream when they're hungry." He vanished into the dark, swallowed by the rain. The boy let out a shaky breath. "Do you trust him?" Silas dropped his cigarette to the stones, grinding it out beneath his heel. His voice was flat. "No." They stood there in the rain, the square echoing with silence and ghosts. In Silas's pocket, the note felt heavy, as though the wax itself bled through his coat. The cobblestones gleamed beneath the lamps, red and black under the rain. And Silas knew this was only the beginning, that before long, the streets would drink again. The square seemed emptier after Moth vanished, as though the rain itself had swallowed him. Only the faint sound of dripping gutters and the distant hum of a tram rolling across its rails broke the silence. Silas didn't move right away. He stood with his head slightly lowered, listening. Not to the rain, not to the boy's nervous shifting, but to the rhythm beneath it all. "A city has a pulse," he'd once told a fellow detective. "Learn the beat and you'll know when something is wrong." Tonight the pulse stuttered. "Come on," Silas muttered, tugging his coat tighter. "We're leaving." The boy followed, though his footsteps dragged. He was cold, soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead. Silas led him down a narrower street, where the lamps were dimmer and the cobblestones older, uneven, as if centuries of footsteps had carved them into shallow bowls. Pools of water gathered there, reflecting the broken glow of lamps like shattered glass. Silas's hand hovered near his revolver as they walked. Not drawn, but close. Years in the underworld had carved instinct into him. You never turned your back fully on a meeting with an informant, especially one as slippery as Moth. The boy finally spoke, his voice a hushed whisper. "You don't trust him, but you still took what he gave you." Silas's lips twitched around the cigarette balance between them. He didn't answer immediately. Smoke curled up into the rain before the drops extinguished it. "You learn," Silas said at last, "that truth is a rare coin in this city. You don't throw it away when it lands in your hand, even if you're sure it's cursed." The boy didn't reply. He only looked at the satchel, as though it might burst open with secrets too heavy for either of them to carry. They reached an intersection where 3 alleys converged, forming a crooked Y shape. The lamps here were broken, their iron frames twisted by rust and neglect. Darkness pressed close, broken only by the pale reflections of water on the stones. Silas paused, scanning each mouth of alley. His ribs ached when he shifted, but he ignored the pain. And then he heard it. Not the rain, not the tram. Something else. Footsteps, light, deliberate. Multiple, coming from behind and ahead. Faint but undeniable. Silas's breath slowed. He dropped the cigarette, crushing it under his boot. His voice, when he spoke, was low but calm. "Stay close to me." The boy froze, his eyes wide. "What's happening?" Silas didn't answer. Instead, he slid his revolver free, the metal cool in his palm. His shoulders squared, his stance shifting. He angled the boy behind him. From the far alley, a figure appeared. Then another and another. Men in coats, hats pulled low, their faces shadowed. Silas counted 3. From behind, he caught the same rhythm of steps. 2 more, 0.5, maybe more in the dark. The boy whispered, his voice trembling. "Are they with him?" "With Moth." Silas's jaw clenched. He thought of the crooked smile, the sing-song voice. A favor owed, a warning given. This was the favor. "Probably," Silas said. The men stepped closer, the slick cobblestones catching their reflections in the pools of rain. One of them, a broad-shouldered brute with a scar carving his cheek, raised his chin. His voice was gravel. "Kane, hand over the satchel. Walk away." Silas's eyes narrowed. He shifted the revolver slightly, enough to show it gleamed under the weak light. "Not happening." "You don't walk away," the brute said, stepping closer. "You don't walk at all." The boy's breath hitched. Silas felt it, raw fear radiating from him. The boy gripped his sleeve as though clinging to anchor. Silas didn't shake him off. Instead, he did what he always did when the city bared its teeth. He slowed down inside, every sense sharpening, every detail registering. The way the brute's left shoe dragged half an inch more than the right, the glint of steel tucked under another man's coat, the faint tremor in the hand of the youngest among them. He read them as he'd read alleys, shadows, lies, and he knew. They weren't here to scare him. They were here to kill him. The brute growled, taking another step. "Last chance, Kane." Silas didn't flinch. He spoke low just for the boy. "When I move, run to the left. Stay low. Don't stop." The boy's grip tightened. "But do it," Silas said, his voice edged like the revolver in his hand. The rain hammered down harder, masking the rising tension like a drumbeat. For a long second, nobody moved. Just the city, the storm, the breath of men waiting for violence. Then Silas moved. He stepped to the side, quick as lightning, revolver snapping up. The shot cracked, echoing through the alleys like thunder. The brute staggered back, blood blooming across his shoulder. Chaos broke loose, shouts, curses, steel flashing. The boy stumbled left, ducking low as Silas had ordered. Silas fired again, the muzzle flare bright in the rain. Another man fell, his weapon clattering against the stones. But the others surged forward, their knives gleaming, their coats whipping in the storm. The cobblestones rang with footsteps, screams, and the wet slap of bodies colliding. Silas pivoted, dodging a blade, driving his shoulder into a man's gut before slamming the revolvers, but into his temple. The boy, pressed against the wall, covered his ears as blood sprayed across the stones. The rain mixed it, diluted it, but the red still ran into the cracks, painting the cobblestones anew. For Silas, time slowed. He felt each strike, each flash of pain as a knife sliced across his forearm, each recoil as the revolver bucked in his hand. He moved with precision, not frenzy, every shot measured, every step calculated. But 5 men in the dark was never simple math. Point one lunge from the side, blade raised. Silas twisted, too slow, the knife grazing his ribs where Vale's fists had bruised him days ago. Pain flared white-hot. He gritted his teeth, slamming his elbow into the attacker's jaw, feeling bone crack. The brute, bleeding but not dead, surged forward again, rage blazing in his eyes. He swung wildly, a knife catching Silas's coat, ripping fabric. The rain turned everything slick, the stones, the knives, the bodies. The boy's voice cut through the chaos, high and desperate. Silas. Silas turned just in time to see another attacker, closing in on the boy, knife raised. Something inside him snapped. He fired. Once. Twice. The man collapsed inches from the boy, blood spilling across the stones. The boy stared, frozen, horror etched into his young face. Silas didn't have time to comfort him. He spun, drove his boot into the brute's knee, and fired one last shot point blank into his chest. The brute fell, heavy and final, blood mingling with rainwater until the gutter ran red. And then there was silence. Only the rain remained, washing the cobblestones clean, or trying to. But the stones didn't forget. Not here, not ever. Silas stood in the aftermath, chest heaving, revolver smoking faintly. His coat was torn, his arm bleeding, his ribs screaming with pain. Around him, bodies sprawled on the stones, their lifeblood pooling in the cracks. The boy pressed against the wall, trembling, his face pale. His wide eyes met Silas's, and for the first time, Silas saw not just fear there, but something darker. A recognition, a mark left by what he had just witnessed. Silas lowered the revolver slowly. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Come on, we can't stay." The boy didn't move at first. He stared at the stones, at the blood washing between them, down into the gutters. Finally, with shaking legs, he pushed himself from the wall and stumbled towards Silas. Together, they walked away, leaving the bodies cooling on the cobblestones. The rain fell harder, drowning the square, but Silas knew the stones would remember. They always remembered. The night felt heavier once the fighting stopped. Rain filled the silence where gunshots had echoed moments before, tapping steadily on the broken lamps. The gutters, the lifeless bodies sprawled across the cobblestones. Steam rose faintly from the barrel of Silas's revolver, then faded, leaving only the acrid scent of powder mixing with wet iron. The boy clung close as they walked, stumbling over the stones slick with blood and rainwater. His breath hitched in shallow bursts, and his face was pale enough to blend with the storm's pallid light. He hadn't spoken since the shooting ended. Silas glanced at him, but said nothing at first. There were no words to strip away what the boy had seen, no comfort that could unring the bell of violence. Silas himself knew too well that first moment, the one where the veil tore and the world revealed itself as merciless, blood-soaked, final. The boy had crossed that threshold tonight, whether he was ready or not. "Keep walking," Silas murmured at last. "Don't look back." The boy's eyes flicked toward the bodies. Then he squeezed them shut and kept moving, his steps quick, almost frantic, as though distance might erase memory. They turned into another alley, narrower, darker, the city pressing in on all sides. The storm muted, softened by brick walls, but water still trickled from rusted pipes, running in thin veins down the stone. Silas finally slowed near a recessed doorway, sheltered from the worst of the rain. He pressed his back to the wall, catching his breath, his ribs aching from both old bruises and fresh cuts. He could feel warmth soaking into his shirt where the knife had grazed him. He ignored it. The boy, shivering, leaned against the wall opposite. His lips trembled, but not from cold alone. "You killed them," he whispered. The words weren't accusation, so much as disbelief. Silas met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "They would have killed us. They would have killed you." The boy swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. He hugged his arms around himself, eyes darting to the satchel clutched against Silas's side. This is because of that, isn't it? That bag, that book." Silas looked down at the satchel, its leather darkened by rain, its wax seal unbroken. He had carried many things in his time, Dossiers, ledgers, evidence no court would ever see. But tonight the bag felt heavier, as though the dead themselves weighed upon it. Everything in this city, Silas said quietly, is because of something. He crouched slightly, wincing at the pull in his ribs, and set the satchel on the wet stones. His fingers brushed the wax seal, tracing the stamped insignia, an old family crest, blurred but unmistakable. His breath stilled. He hadn't seen that crest in years, not since Silas closed his hand into a fist. Not yet. Not here. The boy's voice cracked, breaking the silence. I don't want to die in these streets. Silas studied him for a long moment. The rain dripped steadily from the eaves above, each drop striking the cobblestones with quiet persistence. He thought of the bodies left behind, of the way the boy's voice had sliced through the fight when danger closed in. And he thought of himself, younger once, caught in a similar moment with no one to shield him. You won't, Silas said at last. Not tonight. The boy's eyes filled, though he blinked hard against it. His hands tightened on his sleeves, knuckles white. Silas lifted the satchel again, tucking it under his arm. But if you're going to stay near me, you need to understand something. Violence follows truth in this city. You chase one, the other will always find you. The boy didn't answer, but his silence was agreement enough. He had already seen the cost. They moved again, weaving through the alleys until the square and its corpses were far behind. Silas led them to a narrow bridge arched over a drainage canal. The water beneath was dark, sluggish, carrying refuse and rain alike into deeper channels of the city. The stench rose with the mist, foul and heavy. Silas leaned on the railing for a moment, staring into the water. He thought of the men who had come for him, of Moth's sly words, of the crest pressed into wax. His chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from recognition. The ledger wasn't just a record of debts. It was a reckoning, and someone wanted it silenced badly enough to send blades into the rain. He lit another cigarette, the flame trembling in the wind, and drew in smoke as though it might steady his thoughts. The boy hovered beside him, still trembling, but calmer now in the presence of purpose. What's in it? The boy asked, nodding at the satchel. Silas exhaled slowly, watching the smoke dissolve into mist. Names, he said, and names are worth more than gold in this city, sometimes worth more than life. The boy shuddered. He leaned against the railing, staring into the dark canal as though it might swallow everything he'd seen tonight. So what do we do now? Silas turned, his gaze steady, unreadable. We find out whose blood already stains these stones, and whose will be next. The rain eased then, tapering into a mist, the cobblestones glistening faintly under a dim wash of light. The city seemed quieter, holding its breath, waiting for the next move in a game where every step was paid in blood. Silas pushed away from the railing, the satchel secure under his arm. His shadow stretched across the stones as he walked, long and jagged, as if the city itself tried to warn him of what loomed ahead. The boy followed, silent, his innocence bleeding into the cobblestones behind them. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the smoke and rain, the city whispered again, low, persistent, hungry. The cobblestones had drunk deeply tonight, but Silas knew the thirst was far from quenched.